Howdy, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast of Healthy Alternatives. Today is going to be another podcast on aspartame approval. The last podcast we did took you through the very rocky 1970s, where Searle Pharmaceuticals, after discovering aspartame in the 1960s, had applied twice for FDA approval, and twice they were denied. Back in the 70s, the FDA was doing their job, and they were carefully scrutinizing the independent research that was presented to them, proving that aspartame caused holes in the brains of their laboratory mice, seizures in their monkeys, fetal deformities, infertility. So the FDA was carefully weighing both sides of this issue and had denied them approval twice. So in 1979, there had been an FDA task force put together to research Searle's continuous application for a product that had been shown to cause cancer and other health effects. What was interesting about this was that Searle Pharmaceuticals had a track record of applying for approval for medications that also proved to be very harmful to human health. They had a track record of submitting falsified research documents. And so this 1979 task force had indeed uncovered more falsified documents that pertained to aspartame. Searle was trying to convince the FDA that it was perfectly safe, but they had enough independent research presented to them to where they could show that aspartame was indeed a carcinogen. So they banned it again for the second time, and they denied its approval based on these brain tumor issues and said, look, if you can resolve these brain tumor issues, then come on back and let us see what you got. So it took them from 1979 to 1981 to somewhat put on the full court press to get aspartame approved. For some reason, they were not going to give up on this, and they continued to stack the deck. They continued to put their buddies into the upper echelon of the FDA to try to get its approval. And indeed, after a rocky 10 years in the 70s, they were able to secure aspartame approval. So here we go on this. After the Board of Inquiry had revoked the second FDA approval and banned aspartame for human consumption, that very next year, in 1981, January, starting the year off, Searle reapplied for aspartame approval for the third time. Only 4 months later, in April of 1981, newly elected President Ronald Reagan kind of cleaned house, and he appointed a new FDA director, Arthur Hall Hayes, an MD, and no relation, thank goodness, as the new FDA commissioner. All right, just a few months later, in July of 1981, Dr. Hayes had overruled the 1979 Public Board of Inquiry's recommendation that aspartame not be approved, and he granted aspartame approval in dry goods. So this is when aspartame showed up as NutraSweet and as a tabletop sugar substitute in the little blue packet labeled and marketed as equal. So this was in 1981. In 1982, NutraSweet's patent was extended for 10 years to expire in 1992. In 1983, they approved NutraSweet in carbonated beverages and carbonated beverage syrup bases. So now it was time to rock and roll. Now they could put it in Diet Colas, and that was their biggest money maker. In 1984, aspartame was approved in children's chewable multivitamins, but the brain tumor issue had not been resolved. In 1987, NutraSweet received FDA approval in baked goods and in baking products. So for the most part, they had taken over the diet sweetener market, which is what they wanted to do. Now, we're going to segue a little bit in 1987 because they had a U.S. Senate hearing for the second time. The first hearing was in 1976. This hearing was whether aspartame indeed needed to be approved for the open market. Senators Edward Kennedy, Howard Metzenbaum, and Orrin Hatch were in charge of this hearing. It was really kind of hard to tell if the senators were really very concerned or interested in the health dangers of aspartame because they didn't have any reaction. They did not react to any concern. So, as we can see, aspartame is still on the market today. So 2 Senate hearings, 3 FDA approvals, third one was a charm, and we still have not resolved the brain tumor and the cancerous issues. Then again, in July of 2023, the WHO makes this announcement that aspartame has been found to cause cancer. So I still question why. Why now? Why 50 years later did they make this announcement when they knew this all along? All right, by 1988, independent researchers began tallying increases in headaches, seizures, cancerous tumors, depression, and brain lesions, all confirming the predictions of aspartame's neurotoxicity from decades before. You know, I spoke with a neurosurgeon, and he told me that this was the very, very first time that they had ever experienced someone with a brain tumor who shows up on an MRI with a mass that's filled, and they go in for surgery, and they realize that it's a hole in the brain that has filled with blood. This was the first time they began seeing that as well. Alrighty, so they knew that aspartame was caused as early as the 1970s. They tried to adjudicate this in the 70s. They tried to bring it back up again in the 80s, but aspartame was approved in 1982. Okay, so the 80s was sort of a wash. It was a push to get aspartame approved. They succeeded. It was approved. Now it was in dry goods. It was in gums. It was in diet colas, which was, again, like I said, the biggest moneymaker. So now let's push it up to the 1990s here. And I believe in the 1990s we could probably title that resistance is futile. The researchers didn't stop. They did not stop trying to make it public, trying to make this apparent to our government agencies that aspartame was indeed a carcinogen and harmful to human health, that aspartame was harmful to use during pregnancy. The AMA would not buy into it. They would not support this. They did not inform their doctors of this information. And what doctors did question them about this, they asked them to never bring up the subject again. So in the 1980s, what we were looking at is the push to get the information out was futile. I started writing Sweet Poison on my personal experience with aspartame toxicity in 1991. My book came out in 1997, and I did what I could do with that as well. Okay, so now what we're looking at here is aspartame was found exclusively in NutraSweet and Equal. And if you can remember, Searle Pharmaceuticals was the founder of aspartame. Then Donald Rumsfeld engineered the sale of Searle Pharmaceuticals to Monsanto Chemical Company, and Monsanto had the exclusive patent on saccharin at this time. I will be doing another podcast on the safety of saccharin, that it never did cause cancer, and I'm going to give you all the sauce on that, which I have. In the 1990s, we also saw that sugar bashing became a fad. They pushed this diet sweetener industry, they pushed the fads, they pushed all the products, they pushed it for old, young, pregnancy, male, female. They pushed it everywhere. And sugar bashing became popular with movie stars, sports figures, and all kinds of celebrities that were seen flashing their diet colas on their TV shows, in their movies, at half times during sports events, and that was the way to go. So if you wanted to be anybody that was anybody, you were going to be on the diet sweetener train. No one wanted to hear the truth about aspartame dangers, and believe me, I tried to get the truth out, as did so many other research scientists that knew aspartame was harming their health. The doctors weren't in support, the government wasn't in support, and definitely not the consumers that were sucking down up to 12 cans of diet soda a day. This was so common. What was being marketed to them was that you could eat and drink as much of the diet colas and as much as the diet food products that you wanted, because it was going to do you no harm. So you could live it up and party it up and eat your sweets and eat your ice cream and drink your colas with absolutely no adverse side effects. And this is what so many people bought into. And this was what was so wrong. So very wrong. Aspartame dangers were falling on deaf ears. The mantra was, if the FDA approved it, then it must be safe. Sadly, aspartame victims were ignored, but everyone was watching Cher touting her diet cola in commercials. So let's go to 1991. I hosted the first national symposium on the safety of NutraSweet Equal when I was teaching, where I was teaching at the University of North Texas in Denton. This was in November of 1991. I had the research scientist come and speak. I had mothers of victims whose children were permanently damaged by aspartame. I had mothers come to speak who used it during pregnancy, whose babies were born with a lower IQ and a cleft palate. I had pilots come to speak who were testifying how pilots would pass out in the cockpit from using NutraSweet and Equal. And I had doctors, medical doctors come, neurosurgeons come to speak about how aspartame is truly a neurotoxin that indeed causes holes and lesions to form in your brain. It was a really great symposium, and I actually had the NutraSweet marketing manager come to speak to defend the safety of NutraSweet and Equal. She said during her speech that she herself was pregnant and she herself was using the product. Very interesting symposium. In 1991, Canada was the first country at this time to apply for approval for Splenda. And Splenda did not come onto the market in the United States until the year 2000, because aspartame did not lose its patent until 1992, and they spent the later years of the 1990s trying to milk the industry the best that they could. I'm going to be doing a podcast on the history of stevia. I was there when stevia was first brought into the United States in the 1980s, and its history of approval and its marketing history is very interesting. It didn't really come onto the market until mid-2000s. So NutraSweet, the NutraSweet company, hung on to its exclusive patent rights for as long as they could milk it. And as we can see, it's still on the market today. So I'll be doing another podcast about, is Splenda really safe or not? Which I think if you guys read my work and read my books, you know it is not. And then we'll be talking about the history of saccharin and the history of stevia. So welcome to Healthy Alternatives Podcasts. This was a quick one, but this one was explaining to you the political push to get aspartame approved in 1982 and still on the market today. Its carcinogenic side effects, its fetal deformities, it causes seizures, and it also exacerbates, if not causes, many types of diabetes. All of this has not gone away. So it may still be on the market, but the health effects are still there too. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wish you well, stay safe, and stay healthy.